You walk through the marble streets of ancient Rome sandals, brushing against dust that has settled from 1,000 voices of judgment. You feel it, don't you? That tightening in your chest before you speak in front of others. That pause where your mind races, what if they don't like me? What if they misunderstand? What if they disapprove? But imagine just for a moment, if you could breathe through all of that. What if none of it had the power to shake your calm? Marcus Aurelius would tell you this. If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment of it. The anxiety that churns inside you before a meeting, a dinner party, or even a comment thread, it isn't the people. It's the invisible cage you've built from your need to be approved of. That cage is made of thoughts like, they must like me. I must not upset them. If they disapprove, I have failed. But Seneca, ever direct, would challenge that illusion. He warned of how much of life we surrender in servitude to imagined masters. He who fears death will never do anything worth a man who is alive, he wrote. What would he say about someone who fears disapproval just as much as death? What do you think he would say to you, shrinking yourself to fit into every social setting, tailoring your words so finely they lose all truth? It's here that the Stoic clarity cuts through the fog. You've confused being agreeable with being safe. But you're not safer when you please everyone, you're simply exhausted. Social anxiety becomes your constant companion, not because you're weak, but because you've assigned too much power to others. Their opinions loom large in your mental sky like thunderclouds, and you forget entirely that you can choose where to place the sun. Imagine being in a Roman courtyard as dusk falls. Candles flicker on stone ledges. In one corner, a senator boasts loudly of his achievements. In another, a poet argues bitterly about philosophy. And in the far corner, Marcus Aurelius sits silent, observing, breathing, writing in his journal not for fame, not for approval, but for his own clarity. You don't need their praise, his posture says. You only need your peace. It sounds noble, maybe even unreachable. You might say, but I care too much. It's just how I am. And yet that very story is one you can rewrite. Scholars still debate, was Stoicism cold detachment or fierce inner freedom? The truth is likely both. Detachment from what does not serve you and fierce commitment to protecting your peace. That means recognizing how people-pleasing is not kindness, but quiet self-betrayal. That means confronting the fact that your silence in discomfort isn't stoic, it's avoidance unless it stems from strength. So you begin by noticing. The next time your voice trembles before a group, the next time you rehearse your sentences obsessively, you pause. You remember, this is the cage. And in that moment, you ask the question Seneca would want you to ask. What part of this is truly mine to control? You may not master this in a day, but you can master the next moment. And then the next. That is Stoicism. That is the path. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. To understand this better, let's go back to an ancient lesson from Marcus Aurelius. You continue down the winding street, the stones worn smooth by generations. A soft breeze carries the distant clatter of conversation from the taverns and homes nearby. And again, it returns that flicker of unease. You remember the moment you walked into a room and felt like shrinking. The moment a friend raised an eyebrow and you scrambled to justify yourself. The silence that followed your suggestion in a group and how your stomach dropped as if something vital had been taken. Why does disapproval feel so dangerous? Epictetus answers you plainly. If someone does not see the value in your truth, that is their concern, not yours. This is a man who was born into slavery, crippled by his master, and yet he speaks with more calm than most emperors. What gave him this power? It wasn't wealth, status, or applause. It was detachment from needing others to validate his worth. But that doesn't make it easy. You've been trained since childhood to please teachers, parents, friends, strangers. You learned early that approval is rewarded and resistance is punished. Now, as an adult, you carry that same fear, and it leaks into your voice, your decisions, your posture. You laugh when you're uncomfortable. You say yes when your entire soul is whispering no. And the worst part, no one notices. Because on the surface, everything looks agreeable. Seneca saw through this illusion. He wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." You don't fear actual rejection. You fear the ghost of it. You fear that if you speak your truth even gently, the group will exile you. That if you stand firm, you'll be alone. But are you not already lonely in your performance? Isn't people-pleasing its own kind of exile from yourself? Picture the Roman Senate. Stoic philosophers surrounded by voices louder and richer than theirs, and yet they speak only when needed. They do not flatter, they do not clamor. They wait. And when they speak, their words carry weight not because they pander, but because they are grounded. When you stay silent rather than compromise your truth, it isn't weakness, it's preparation, it's centering. Modern scholars ask, can Stoicism coexist with our social world, where likability opens doors, but maybe that's the wrong door. Maybe the peace you're seeking isn't behind social approval, but behind integrity. The kind of integrity that lets you walk away from someone's misunderstanding without chasing them to correct it. The kind that lets you say, let them think what they want, I know who I am. So you try it. The next time someone challenges you or throws a subtle jab, you breathe, you listen, and you choose not to explain yourself unless it serves truth. Not because you're scared, but because you're strong enough to let their misunderstanding exist. This is power, quiet, invisible, but real. You begin to feel it, a new kind of freedom where your value no longer swings on the hook of someone else's opinion. It's not instant, but it's growing. You learn to love silence not as a retreat, but as your declaration, I do not need to perform for you to feel worthy. You sit now beneath a fig tree, its branches casting dappled shadows onto the marble stones beside you. And you reflect not just on your fear of being disliked, but on the ways you've bent yourself out of shape trying to avoid it. A compliment you didn't mean. A nod you didn't believe. An agreement that felt like betrayal not to them, but to yourself. Marcus Aurelius would have seen this, and he would have smiled not in mockery, but in recognition. He knew this impulse. He wrote, "The approval of others trifles. What matters is to be right in your own eyes." It's not arrogance he defends, but alignment. Living in harmony with your own reason, not the shifting tides of opinion. And yet, social survival is ancient. Your ancestors depended on belonging. To be cast out meant exposure, hunger, death. That instinct hasn't left you. It now manifests as nervous laughter, as the pressure to agree, as the hesitation before you say what you really think. So how does a Stoic who understands biology, psychology, and the weight of reputation still choose not to people please? By remembering what you can control. Your character, your intention, not how others interpret you. Seneca spoke about this often. In his letters, he tells Lucilius to stop worrying whether others praise or blame him. He says, a good character once established is not harmed by the opinions of others. That's the anchor. Not popularity, but principle. Your virtue is your compass. If you act in line with it, you're never lost, even when the crowd frowns. You may wonder, doesn't this mean becoming cold, detached? Some scholars argue that Stoicism invites isolation, that by placing too much weight on the internal, we risk disconnection. But that's not what Seneca taught. He believed in compassion, in service, in friendship. But he also believed that those connections should not cost your soul. So now you begin to build that inner courtroom. Before you speak or bend, you pause and ask, am I acting from reason or fear, not to scold yourself, but to train the muscle of awareness? And when you feel the old panic rise, the need to fix someone's disappointment, you hold still. You breathe. You remember their mood is not your mission. You don't become rude. Stoicism doesn't ask that of you, but you become steady, warm but immovable. Like a fire that gives light but does not chase. You stop chasing. Picture the Roman philosopher Musonius Rufus teaching in exile. No crowds, no fame. Just quiet truths whispered in a distant land. He didn't perform. He taught because it was right, not because it was rewarded. You begin to admire that strength, the kind that doesn't need applause to keep going. You walk back into the world a little taller, not louder, just clearer. When someone misunderstands you, you don't collapse. When someone is disappointed in your no, you don't rush to undo it. You start to love the peace of being true more than the thrill of being liked. And this peace, it's earned, not through grand gestures, but through thousands of small, silent acts of staying with yourself. You return home after a long day, shoulders tense, jaw tight from a dozen awkward encounters. That person who raised their eyebrow when you spoke. The group that kept talking after you entered. The moment you said something and silence followed, heavy and unbroken. It lingers. But as the lamp flickers and the shadows stretch across your walls, you remember something Epictetus taught. If someone speaks ill of you, do not make excuses, but reply, he was unaware of the other faults I have, else he would not have mentioned only these. He doesn't teach self-loathing. He teaches freedom from the exhausting need to justify yourself. Tonight you realize explaining yourself is not always clarity. Sometimes it's craving, a craving to be understood, to be approved, to be seen as good. But is that your job, to clean up how others see you? Seneca once described public life as walking through a thick crowd. People bump into you. Some out of carelessness, some out of malice. You can't control it. But you can choose not to push back. Not because you're weak, but because you're going somewhere, and turning around means losing direction. Social anxiety often stems from imagining that others are watching your every move, judging it. But the Stoics remind you most people are too preoccupied with their own worries to notice yours. And if they do judge you, that judgment is theirs, not yours. Let it stay with them. You pour a small cup of water. It ripples. You stare. Marcus Aurelius might have done the same, gazing into stillness as he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." That's the shift. Not how do I make people stop judging me, but how do I stay steady even when they do? A philosophical dilemma arises. Some argue that a Stoic's detachment from judgment can lead to arrogance. That by saying, "I don't care what others think," one risks becoming indifferent to community or blind to feedback. But that's a misunderstanding. Stoicism doesn't ask you to ignore others, it asks you to prioritize inner clarity. To weigh feedback through reason, not reflex. To ask, is this true? Is this useful? If not, let it pass. Imagine Cato, the Roman statesman, known for walking barefoot through the Senate, for dressing plainly even among the elites. He was ridiculed, mocked, but he stood unshaken. Not because he didn't feel it, but because he chose principles over performance. And you're not in a marble hall, but maybe you're in a boardroom, a classroom, a family dinner. You say something true, and someone smirks. You make a choice that's right but unpopular. In that moment, remember Cato, remember Seneca, and remember this: their power came not from applause, but from alignment with their own values. So tomorrow, when anxiety whispers they won't like this, you breathe. You remember the ripple in your cup. You let the noise pass. You speak simply or not at all. You stop performing. You begin to live. You walk into a room, not a single person looks up. Or worse, one does and quickly looks away. Something stirs inside you, doesn't it? That familiar tightening of the stomach. That inner monologue starts. Did I do something wrong? Did I offend them? Should I say something to smooth it over? This is the loop of people-pleasing. You want connection, peace, approval, but it costs you something each time. Your stillness, your truth, your energy. Seneca once said, "He who seeks to please all men must lose himself." And slowly, if you're not careful, that's exactly what happens. Not all at once, but in tiny, invisible ways. You say yes when you mean no. You laugh when you don't find it funny. You shrink a little just to fit. What the Stoics remind you is this: peace doesn't come from being liked. It comes from being aligned. And alignment means sometimes letting others misunderstand you. You light a candle, just one, and the flickering glow settles the room. That's the image you hold as you think of Marcus Aurelius scribbling in his private notes, reminding himself ambition means tying your well-being to what others say or do. Sanity means tying it to your own actions. He led an empire, yet he understood the trap of reputation. He had advisors flatter him, critics tear him down, enemies scheme behind closed doors. Still, he came back to one thing: his own actions. And so must you. You reflect on how often you've sacrificed rest, joy, even truth, just to smooth the moment, to keep things light or unbothered or comfortable for others. You begin to ask comfortable for whom. A question philosophers still ask is, can one be fully stoic and still be loved, still be admired? Some argue no, that to truly embrace Stoicism is to accept that approval may vanish. Others say true admiration comes not from performance, but from integrity. And that perhaps is the deeper kind of love, earned not through people-pleasing, but quiet strength. You recall the tale of Agrippinus, a lesser-known Stoic. When told he might be exiled for refusing to flatter Nero, he simply replied, "Very well, then I will leave tomorrow." No resistance, no dramatic farewell, just a calm, firm boundary. He stayed true. And though he vanished from the court, his peace stayed with him. You start to wonder, what would it mean to live like that, not cold, not distant, but clear? Someone who speaks when there's truth to speak, who is kind but not performative, who isn't rude but doesn't bend like wind-blown reeds every time approval is withheld. Tomorrow someone may give you a look, a tone, a silence that unsettles you. You'll notice your old instinct: fix it, soften it, make it okay. But you'll pause, breathe. Ask yourself, is this me trying to be loved, or me choosing to be real? In that pause, you reclaim something. The part of you that no longer needs to explain, impress, or correct. The part that slowly becomes unshakable. You remember a moment, maybe at work or at dinner, when someone criticized you lightly in front of others. A joke perhaps said with a smile, but it stung. You laughed along, nodded, brushed it off, but something in your chest twisted, didn't it? You carried that feeling home, replayed it again and again. Why did they say that? Should I have spoken up? Do they think less of me now? This is the invisible suffering of people-pleasing, not the outward humiliation, but the quiet erosion of self-worth. The Stoics had a sharper name for this habit: slavery to opinion. Seneca wrote, "What difference does it make how many masters you have? The man who lives for others never truly lives for himself. It's not that kindness is wrong. Stoicism is not cold indifference. But when your every action bends toward approval, you become a reflection, never the light source. You picture a Roman courtyard again, the hush of wind between columns. A figure sits in stillness, Epictetus, once a slave, now a teacher. He tells his students, if someone speaks ill of you, live so that none will believe it. There's freedom in that. Not reacting, not correcting, just living aligned. The question that lingers in philosophical circles is this: how much of our identity is shaped by the audience we imagine? Some scholars believe even the Stoics crafted their image for posterity. Others argue their writings were reminders, not performances. Epictetus never sought fame. Marcus wrote privately. Seneca wrestled with wealth and reputation, but still asked hard questions of himself. You now ask those questions of yourself. Who am I without applause? Can I sit in a room and be okay with disapproval, silence, or confusion? The uncomfortable truth is most cannot. But that's where your training begins. You look back at the last interaction where you twisted yourself to fit. Maybe you changed your opinion halfway through, or laughed when something felt wrong, or complimented someone just to keep the mood light. You meant no harm. But the harm was internal, a micro-abandonment of truth. Next time you'll try something different. You won't be rude. You won't be defiant. You'll simply stay. Stay quiet when quiet is truer than speech. Stay firm when your opinion differs. Stay kind, but not soft-spined. That's the Stoic path, not to offend, not to charm, but to hold. Remember Agrippinus again. When others argued, he declined to join, not from arrogance, but from clarity. He said, I will be the red thread in the robe. A small difference, but unmistakable. The red thread does not scream, it simply is. You walk through your own world, now cafes, meetings, conversations, and begin noticing where you bend. You begin gently resisting, not by pushing back, but by staying upright. In that small, quiet resistance, you grow. There's a silence more powerful than any argument. It's the silence you hold when someone misjudges you, misunderstands your intention, or mocks your quiet nature. Instead of leaping to defend, explain, or smooth things over you, simply breathe, stay still, and say nothing. But saying nothing is not the same as doing nothing. In fact, Stoicism teaches that silence, when purposeful, becomes a kind of shield. Marcus Aurelius wrote, if anyone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake, I will gladly change. But I must be convinced, not by an insult, but by truth. You are not resisting correction. You are resisting performance. You remember this principle most vividly when walking the Roman streets in your mind, stone beneath your sandals, whispers of politics in the markets, and 1,000 daily dramas unfolding. One senator insults another in the forum. The crowd murmurs, anticipating rebuttal, but the accused man offers none. He merely smiles. The attacker withers. That scene, though imagined, echoes a real strategy used by Musonius Rufus, the teacher of Epictetus. When challenged on his ideas, he rarely responded with emotion. He'd let others speak themselves into exhaustion. Then calmly, he'd ask a single question, not to dominate, but to invite reflection. The power wasn't in his voice, it was in his restraint. Now think about today's world. Everyone speaks so fast, online, in meetings, in relationships. The temptation is to react immediately, to defend your name, to reframe the story. But what happens when you don't? What happens when you trust your life, your conduct to speak for you? The Stoics would say you reclaim your energy. You don't throw it into the pit of argument. You let it nourish your actions. And when those actions are steady, patient, and kind, who can truly condemn you? Still, there's a debate buried beneath this. Should we always stay silent when insulted? Doesn't that allow injustice to flourish? Scholars debate this often. Some say silence is noble only when paired with integrity. Others believe silence can be cowardice in disguise. The Stoic response is more nuanced. You do not retreat from injustice, you rise above it. If your response will serve a purpose, give it calmly. If it will only feed fire, hold it back. Seneca warned, "It is better to conquer our grief than to deceive it." The same applies to anger. Conquer, don't bury. And if conquering it means saying nothing, that is strength. You begin to notice the moments where silence isn't passive, it's a form of mastery. When someone gossips about you and you choose not to correct the record. When a friend dismisses your efforts and you nod without needing to elaborate. These are not defeats. They are clean exits. And slowly, this kind of silence builds another virtue, self-trust. The less you explain yourself to others, the more you listen to yourself. That inner compass, the voice you've long ignored, grows clearer. So when the next storm of criticism arrives, ask yourself, is this worth my peace? Does speaking now lead to truth or just more noise? And if the answer is silence, stay in it. Stay grounded. Stay dignified. That too is power. You carry the weight of your own thoughts into the room long before you speak. Every worry about how they see you, every urge to earn a smile or avoid a frown, it walks in with you. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear Seneca whisper, "A mind in harmony is a fortress no insult can breach." But when you try to live that, the pull of people-pleasing is strong. You want to be liked. You want approval, and you fear rejection more than you'd admit. That's not weakness, it's deeply human. But Stoicism teaches that what's human isn't always helpful. You sit on a stone bench beside your imagination of Seneca's villa columns casting long shadows, the hush of Roman gardens. He writes letters to a young man who fears disappointing others. You are that young man. We all are at some point. But Seneca doesn't coddle. He reminds you you were not born to win applause. You were born to be virtuous. This lands heavily when you realize how often your actions are performative, not dishonest, just misaligned. You agree when you don't want to. You apologize when you've done nothing wrong. You flatter when silence would have sufficed, all to avoid being disliked. And yet, has that ever truly brought peace? Or has it only postponed conflict? When you betray yourself to please others, resentment brews quietly. Stoicism calls this out. It says serve others, but never at the cost of your integrity. Marcus Aurelius dealt with this too. Imagine being emperor with senators vying for favor and citizens interpreting every word. Still, he wrote, "I have to go through with it, and I do not have to succeed." That is, your duty is to act with virtue, not to be loved for it. There's a tension here that scholars still debate. Should Stoics care what others think at all? Some argue that Stoicism veers dangerously close to isolationism. Others say Stoicism doesn't deny social bonds. It simply rejects chains of dependency. You begin to see it now. You're not asked to be indifferent to people only to their approval. You can care for someone deeply and still not bend to their expectations. That is a higher form of respect for them and for you. So how do you put this into practice? You start by noticing. The next time you feel the urge to over-explain, pause. Ask, what truth am I abandoning here? What peace am I trading for approval? If the answer stings, that's where you grow. Second, you embrace discomfort. Saying no might feel like a failure, but it is a quiet victory over self-abandonment. Holding your boundary, even if it disappoints others, is not cruelty. It's clarity. Third, you reflect at night not to judge yourself harshly, but to tune in. Epictetus urged students to examine their day. What did I do well? Where did I betray my principles? This simple reflection helps build resilience the next day. The reward. It's not applause. It's not universal admiration. It's that slow, steady confidence, the kind you don't need to advertise. The kind that lets you walk into any room not with fear or pride, but with peace. The faces around you blur. A crowd, a meeting, a quiet dinner with too many expectations. You know the tension that builds when you feel watched, weighed, measured. Social anxiety and the urge to please don't just whisper in your ear, they grip your chest. But in that moment, a question from Seneca echoes. Why do you fear their judgment when they have not even mastered themselves? It's not a dismissal, it's clarity. You've spent years fearing how others might interpret your silences, your missteps, your imperfections. But Stoicism reminds you their opinion is not your burden, your own response is. Take Marcus Aurelius. He governed during wars, famine, and plague. He faced criticism not just in whispers, but in Senate halls and public squares. Still, he wrote to himself, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." Imagine holding that truth in your chest the next time someone tries to put you in a box you don't belong in. But that's hard. Scholars have long debated whether Stoicism's dismissal of externals is too extreme. Isn't it natural to want belonging, acceptance, of course? But Stoicism doesn't ask you to become a rock. It asks you to become a river, calm, steady, moving with depth beneath the surface. You don't have to reject connection. You reject dependence. There's a difference. So what do you do when the anxiety rises before a conversation, or you rehearse your words 3 times before speaking? You step outside yourself for a moment. Not to abandon your feelings, but to observe them as a Stoic would. Ah, there it is. You whisper the fear of not being enough. And then you ask, is it true? Or is it just old armor I forgot I was still wearing? This is the inner work. You slowly replace fear with principle. You begin speaking truth, even if your voice trembles. You learn to be misunderstood without unraveling. You start to notice that not every silence needs filling, not every frown needs fixing. Seneca would remind you, he who seeks wisdom is indifferent to applause. You might not believe that today. That's fine. Stoicism is not a light switch, it's a muscle. You strengthen it with each quiet choice. Each moment you say less, observe more, breathe longer before reacting. And sometimes you'll slip. You'll overshare to keep the peace. You'll agree too quickly. But afterward, in the privacy of your evening reflections, you can ask what Seneca asked. Was this done out of virtue or out of fear? The difference will reveal itself. And as it does, you find something miraculous. Your sense of self no longer shrinks to fit the room. You don't contort to meet others' comfort. You just show up calm, honest, unshaken. That's what Stoicism offers. Not cold detachment, but warm strength. Not perfection, but direction. A path away from self-erasure and toward quiet dignity. So next time you feel yourself twisting under the weight of perceived judgment, pause. Ground your feet. Remember the words of Epictetus. It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them, including the opinions of others. And slowly, your life begins to reflect not what others want from you, but what you truly are. You stand at the threshold now, no longer desperate for approval, no longer frightened by rejection. You've walked with Seneca through discomfort. You've stood with Marcus in solitude. You've listened to Epictetus when your heart felt loud and unsure. Now there's just one more step. you choose not to react. That doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're free. You see the provocation coming, an insult, a cold glance, a backhanded compliment. In the past, you'd fold into yourself or scramble to make peace. But this time you let it pass, like wind brushing past a mountain. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." That applies not only to anger, but to anxiety. To mimic someone's discontent is to borrow their disease. You stop borrowing. Now here's the paradox: you still care. You still want connection. But it no longer dictates your self-worth. You engage because you choose to, not because you must. You say no with compassion. You decline invitations that deplete you. And in doing so, something astonishing happens. Your relationships become real. People can feel when your presence isn't based on fear. It draws better company. Not always easier people, but more honest ones. And in moments of conflict or misunderstanding, you start seeing what Seneca saw: every harsh word has a root in pain. Not always yours, often theirs. Scholars continue to ask, is Stoicism too passive for the real world? But ask yourself this: what takes more strength? Yelling back or standing still, pleading or remaining centered? Stoicism isn't passivity. It's restraint in service of purpose. It's action after reflection, not before. And that's your final practice: action after reflection. You don't live in your head forever. You observe, you feel, you step forward calmly. Maybe that's returning a call tomorrow instead of explaining yourself tonight. Maybe it's turning your phone off without guilt. Maybe it's saying, "I'll think about it," and meaning it. You trust your timing. You trust your worth. You trust silence. Now the anxiety when it returns, as it will no longer runs the show. You name it, breathe through it, and walk on. You remind yourself that even Roman emperors paced the floor at night, wondering if they'd said too much or too little. But they wrote. They reflected. They kept going. And you do the same. You keep a journal. Not a perfect one, just honest. You track your moments of slipping into people-pleasing, not to shame yourself, but to understand. And slowly, the entries change. You start writing things like, "I didn't try to explain myself today," or "I left the room and it was enough." This is the Stoic path, not to escape the world, but to move through it with courage. Not to become cold, but clear. Not to deny your need for others, but to meet that need with strength instead of desperation. You will still feel awkward at times. You will still want to be liked. But now you carry a deeper loyalty to virtue over validation, to clarity over chaos, to stillness over performance. So when someone challenges your boundaries or misunderstands your quiet, you don't panic. You remember what you've practiced. You breathe. You smile if it feels true. You leave if it feels necessary. And when the day ends, you return to yourself. You write. You reflect. You sleep. You wake again free.